So the Lunch and Learn webinar series date today is July 23rd. We've got a number of ones. The next one is July 30th on employer recruitment. And if anyone is missing any of these links to these registration dates, you can reach out to me or Nate, and we can get you the registration links to sign up for all of these if needed. And if you don't know Nate already, he's the State Mentor and Technical Assistance Program Director for Apprenticeship Illinois. He's previously worked at as a specialist for LWIA 23. He studied digital literacy and communication instruction at Eastern Illinois. And with that, I will hand it over to Nate.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nate Carlson, as Jordan introduced, and I wanted to start off today this session called Apprenticeship Fundamentals by setting a baseline for what we should expect to learn today. We're asking for 90 minutes of your time, and you should know what you're going to get out of that. It's a lunch and learn. Hopefully you've got something yummy to snack on. If not, I'm sorry. So first thing first, we're going to understand the 7 components of the U.S. Department of Labor Registered Apprenticeship Program model. This is the same information that our specialists use when they discuss apprenticeship with employers. It's the same information that the apprenticeship training representatives from the Office of Apprenticeship at DOL use in our state. So just setting a base level of knowledge for everybody. We're going to use the 3 C's model of apprenticeship outreach and development. Those of you who have come to our trainings before me already know what those 3 C's are, but it's our way of really expediting and streamlining the apprenticeship development process, and I hope it's beneficial for you in your work in workforce development and apprenticeship. We're going to do some strategizing on how to address some common employer misconceptions about registered apprenticeship, and we're going to discuss key roles in the Illinois apprenticeship ecosystem, which all of you, based on your presence here, are a part of. So that's what we're looking to get out of today's session. Before we start on what apprenticeships are, I think it's good to set some knowledge of what apprenticeships are not. Apprenticeships are not unpaid internships. Sometimes people say apprenticeship and internship, those are basically the same thing, right? It's kind of like saying like the Barbie Jeep in the driveway is the same as the F-150, right? That's not to say there's not a function for internships, but they're different beasts and they're doing different things. Apprenticeships are not just limited to the trades and construction. A lot of times when we hear the word apprenticeship, that's the connotation it has for us, right? We think of linemen, we think of the trades, but in reality, apprenticeships are found throughout all sectors of employment. Apprenticeships aren't just limited to young people or new hires. Through incumbent worker training options or just general upskilling, anybody can be an apprentice. It's not limited to anybody by age or anything else. Apprenticeships are not a delivery system for corporate welfare. We don't just use these programs to push out money to employers to do whatever they want. We are here to help empower employers to make an investment in themselves. And apprenticeships are not a magic wand. If an employer is having issues with retention or hiring generally, apprenticeship can be a useful tool to help them solve those issues, but it's not going to work for everybody, and it's not necessarily a quick fix that just you tap the magic wand and suddenly everything's better. So that if we understand what apprenticeship is not, let's talk about what apprenticeship is. Apprenticeships are paid jobs. Apprenticeships are about earning and learning, and the first word of that is earning. They're usually paid jobs that are full-time with benefits. That's not always the case. Some employers may use registered apprenticeship as kind of an on-ramp for employment, so they may not be considered full-time employees. They may be employed through a different sponsored organization. So again, nothing we're saying is really necessarily true in 100% of cases, but generally speaking, apprenticeships are paid jobs. They're found in every sector. They're open to workers of all ages and backgrounds. And here's what's important, I think we need to center whenever we talk about apprenticeships is the possibility that's represented by them. Because apprenticeships, when they're developed and implemented well, can be a life-changing career opportunity for participants that can revive communities and revitalize businesses. Apprenticeships are a delivery mechanism for meritocracy, right? You work hard to gain skills and you are rewarded for it. And honestly, it's one of the most reliable vehicles for class mobility, because you can take somebody who has their high school diploma, GED, maybe they've been working frontline service sector for a decade or two, and you can upskill them into something paying $70,000, $80,000, $90,000 a year. And that is transformative for individuals and for communities. So we need to center that when we think about registered apprenticeship, that it can be life-changing. And we should have that in the back of our mind whenever we discuss apprenticeship. Most of all, apprenticeship is an investment. When we meet with employers to discuss apprenticeship, whenever I meet with our workforce partners, this is the word I use. Yes, it's a great tool for work-based learning, but when we speak with employers about apprenticeship, they should know up front it is an investment they are making in training and retaining skilled talent. And we'll talk about why it's a model that works so well for retaining that skilled talent, but we should never forget that it is an investment. And so if an apprenticeship is an investment, an apprenticeship which does not sufficiently train or has been designed in such a way that it will not retain skilled talent is functionally null and void. So as workforce development professionals, as public-private partners, it is our role to ensure that employers not only make good investments in registered apprenticeships, but that they make a worthwhile investment. Because if they have developed a program that's not going to give people the skills they need to compete, or is not going to reward them in such a way that it can retain them, that employer is making a bad investment. And in maintaining the legitimacy and the retention rates of apprenticeship is something that we have a lot of ability to influence in our work with employers, and we shouldn't forget that. So I wanted to frame for the rest of the discussion we have today, I want to talk a little bit about Apprenticeship Illinois, which I have the great opportunity to work on. If you don't know Apprenticeship Illinois, we have regional specialists throughout the state who are grantees to DCEO, and our specialists provide tons of great resources and services to employers and partners in their area. So if you're on this call and everything else you hear from me today, you think, whoa, this is way too intense for me, the good news is you don't have to worry about it, and neither do employers, because we have our network of regional specialists. So our regional specialists conduct in-person and virtual apprenticeship outreach events and consultations. They receive and pursue referrals received to our website and from partners. They work with employers to fully develop and register their apprenticeship programs from start to finish. So from interest through registration, it is a one-stop concierge service for developing an apprenticeship program. And lastly, and importantly, for many of you here, apprenticeship specialists connect employers to intermediary partners and other applicable services. So if you are a workforce development partner who is serving customers, if you're a workforce development partner who's serving businesses, our apprenticeship specialists are here to be a resource for you as well, to connect you to those who need your services. So first, we're going to talk about the 7 components of registered apprenticeship. And we're going to start with the idea that apprenticeships are business driven. Now, what does this mean? Employers always have the final say on their program design. And I always say this when I'm meeting with employers. I say neither myself nor DOL nor anyone from the state of Illinois is going to tell you what your program has to look like. Employers have the final say, absolutely. They're able to customize the components of their program. They're able to make the same hiring decisions they would with any other employee. There's no instance in which we are interfering in their ability to conduct their business and their hiring processes. But the specialist role is still about empowering program registration and ensuring program quality. So what that means is we're never going to tell employers what to do, but we are going to be honest when programs are falling short, because again, the goal is retention and the goal is a worthwhile investment. And we have the knowledge to say that, oh, that may not be a competitive wage, or, oh, that credential may not be competitive with what other employers with their programs are offering or requiring. And so we always want to find opportunities to include employer input and customization when we're developing these programs. And I'll show you a few opportunities we have for that. But we want to make sure employers always feel like they're in the driver's seat on this, because one of the barriers we see a lot is the idea that employers expect apprenticeship to be about bureaucracy or be about releasing some element of control over their own hiring and talent management stuff. And so we want to completely take that idea away from them, right? And can always affirm that apprenticeships are business driven. Next, apprenticeships are a paid job. I mentioned that apprenticeships are about earning and learning. The first word of that is earning. And apprentices earn what is called a progressive wage schedule. So what does that mean? It means an apprentice starts at a percentage of the journey worker or experienced worker hourly rate or salary for their role. So if you have somebody who full-time in their field, they would make $27, $28 an hour. An apprentice might start at $15 an hour first year of their program. The second year of their program, after they've gained some skills, maybe they get bumped up to $20 an hour and so on and so forth. And so what this allows for us to do, and again, this is completely customizable, is for their wage to reflect their skill gains in real time. And think about that for a moment, because most of us, when we go through our careers, we don't necessarily know when the next wage increase is coming, right? You work hard, you're putting your nose to the grind, so you're not sure when you're going to see the payoff for that, right? Apprentices know on paper from day one what they have to do to earn that next wage increase. And that's a huge boost to retention. It's much easier to stick out a tough week when you know you're, just days away from a $3 an hour raise than when you have no clue when that's happening. And so we can use ONET data, and I'll show you some examples to determine wage competitiveness for employers, because again, we want to make sure that they are staying competitive with their investment. A lot of employers think, oh, if I'm going to spend all this money training this person up, and then they're going to leave to go get $1 an hour more down the street. And that's usually not the case, but they might leave for $5 or $6 an hour more, and we should feel comfortable telling them that. So I want to talk about wage schedules, right? The idea that the apprentice starts at some portion of the full salary for the position and works their way up. Now, the wage schedules I have listed here below both meet DOL requirements, meaning you could submit both of these with your program and have them signed off. So the top one, they have an hourly wage when they start, that's $15 an hour, and when they're done, they finish at 26. Now, I'll tell you, a wage schedule that's simple like this, employers love this for two reasons. One, obviously, they're paying less throughout the program. Two, their payroll departments are complaining less than they will when they have these incremental increases, right? But which one is actually more likely to incentivize retention? We can see the bottom wage schedule has more of a ramp up, and throughout the program, they're earning those incremental increases on the way to $26 an hour. And so you're more likely to see retention. And even though it means a little more legwork on the payroll department or the HR department at the employer by utilizing those increases. And so again, this is an instance where if we wanted to do the bare minimum, we could do the top. But if we wanted to incentivize retention and make a meaningful investment, we might encourage employers to have something that looks more like the bottom. And so we talk about staying competitive. And this is data pulled from onetonline.org, which is an incredible resource. I'm sure many of you are already familiar with it. One of the ways we classify apprenticeship programs is by their ONET codes, which means for any apprenticeship occupation that we're looking to develop with an employer, we can go and see what the average median wages are for that role. So for here, I've pulled up for Eastern Central Illinois, this is in LWIA 23, the wage for registered nurses. Now we can see it shows us the average or median wage for the United States, it shows us for the state, and then it actually shows us for our specific area, because obviously we recognize those are going to be different even at the state level between municipalities, right? So if I was developing a program with an employer for registered nurses, if I was working with a hospital, and they told me, and I was working in East Central Illinois, and they told me their finishing wage for registered nurses was going to be $26 an hour. And I know from this data that the median is 33, and they're looking at just above the bare minimum for the area. I would be able to tell them, hey, ultimately, again, it's their decision. They're the employer. They decide what they're going to do for their program. But if they set that wage, what is the likelihood that they're going to have a completer go somewhere else versus if they stay competitive? And so it's important that we allow employers to make their own decisions, but also that we empower them to make informed decisions. And so using data like this is one of the ways we can do it. Some employers will say, well, hey, I'm going to be paying for their training. I'm going to be paying for this and that. I should be able to cut the hourly wage to reflect that. After all, I'm expected to pay for everything, right? And that is totally fine for them to feel and do. But ultimately, it is their detriment in the long run if they're unable to retain their employees by making that call. And obviously, we can leverage various funding streams to help make these programs more affordable for them so that they are staying competitive. The third component of registered apprenticeships is on-the-job mentorship. And the the relationship between a mentor and apprentice is crucial, right? It's one of the additional things that creates this retention, because you have someone who you're learning from one-on-one. And so employers are going to assign each apprentice an on-the-job mentor, and the apprentice may work alongside them, or they may have regular check-ins and training sessions with them. They may shadow them early on in the program, and that's going to largely depend based on occupation. If you have a program like CDL, it's going to be tough to have somebody sitting next to you in the cab the entire drive for weeks and weeks, right? But they may be able to check in with them daily or weekly, as long as there's that mentorship component there. And so mentors have a huge role in determining apprentices' progress throughout their program. And so they're the ones, you may have noticed back on that table with the progressive wage schedule, it had the number of competencies they completed. The mentors are the ones who are responsible for analyzing and determining when apprentices have sufficiently completed those competencies. So their role is important. And each program must establish a set ratio of journey workers to apprentices for a number of reasons. One, for safety. Two, for instances of prevailing wage. The employer can't just put a bunch of apprentices on the job site to save some money. They have to maintain the ratio of journey workers to apprentices that they said up front they would. The fourth element of apprenticeships is supplemental education. And what does this mean? A huge component of apprenticeships, earning and learning. And so apprentices learn on the job from their mentor, and they also learn in a classroom environment of some kind. Apprentices must receive at least 144 hours of classroom learning per year. In the vast majority of cases, this training is fully funded upfront by the employer. Some employers may utilize a reimbursement model. Some employers may split the cost with the apprentice 50-50, but in most cases, the employer is paying for the entirety of this education, perhaps in combination with some WIOA or local funding upfront. And again, that's a huge value add for the apprentice, because they are receiving a debt-free education, setting them on a skill path for success. The vast majority of programs are serviced their classroom education by community colleges or industry recognized third parties. There are other options, but again, when we talk about quality, we know that our community college partners are accredited. We know that industry recognized third parties have a value to the credentials they're adding. Employers may have an instinct to opt for the cheapest option. We're going to try and dissuade them of that in most cases, and we'll show you how you do that later on. But generally speaking, we want to make sure that we're utilizing education that helps create a highly skilled employee, and B, is a value add for the apprentice themselves. And training can be front loaded as necessary. So if you see that 144 hours, and by the way, 144 contact hours is what we're looking at there. So that's usually somewhere in the range of 4 to 5 3-credit hour courses at a community college. That's going to vary based on if there's lab hours versus lecture hours, and that's going to vary based on occupation. But it's very doable for the most part in terms of if you shift them for night classes, if you do have them do, 1 day a week, there's all sorts of scheduling options that you can look at with various training providers to make that doable. Most programs, it should be noted, have beyond 144 hours. Many programs have as far as a certificate or an associate's degree, though that's not necessary for all occupations and not all employers will choose to go that route. But 144 hours is the floor in terms of hours per calendar year of an apprenticeship program. I know that training can be front loaded. So obviously, if you're something like a CNA or a truck driver, you're not going to be able to do your classroom hours once you've begun the on the job, because you can't do that work until you are credentialed. And so for something like a CNA, the employer might pay for the CNA, they do the class up front, and then the rest of the program is them learning on the job with the mentor. So that's doable too. So we say this 144 hours, but there's lots of different ways we can fit that into their schedule and make it work. Things like required trainings like OSHA, we don't necessarily want that to be built in as part of their supplemental education. This is, again, sometimes employers in the pursuit of saving expenses will say, oh, well, I already have to have them do, sexual harassment training every year. That does not count, should not count towards their classroom education. This should be education that supplements the training they are receiving to do the job that their occupation specifies. Apprenticeships facilitate diversity, and so programs are designed to reflect the communities in which they are located through strong non-discrimination, anti-harassment practices, and recruitment practices that ensure access, equity, and inclusion. And so when we develop these programs, we standardize the hiring processes and requirements to make sure that all applicants and apprentices are being treated equitably. And the program sponsors also work with their DOL ATR. If you're thinking, what's an ATR? We will get there. To develop an affirmative action plan within 2 years of registration. Now, a bit of an asterisk on that second bullet point, that is for programs that have 5 apprentices or more. So if you're working with a mom and pop shop and they only have 2 apprentices, they're not going to be required to go through the full affirmative action plan process. If you're working with a larger organization and they have a cohort of 20 apprentices, they're going to need to within that 2-year threshold. And our DOL ATRs are really great about helping employers through this process. Apprenticeships ensure quality and safety. So we've heard competencies a few times throughout the day already. And so those skill competencies are standardized for each occupation to ensure the quality of training outcomes. Now we can have some flexibility in customizing the competencies for the roles, but generally speaking, you want to make sure that if the role says they're an industrial maintenance tech, that you haven't completely taken out all of the competencies that ensure to other employers they know how to do that role. Having that mentor-apprentice ratio encourages worksite safety, especially in instances where there may be heavy machinery utilized or some other sort of environmental hazard. And specialists take on an advisory role to help employers design programs with high quality apprentice outcomes. And when we say high quality outcomes, again, we're reflecting back on the idea that these programs can be life-changing, can be immensely rewarding for the communities and employers who develop them. And so again, this is an instance in which we're taking on an advisory capacity and working with the employer to help ensure that not only are they going to boost their productivity, boost their profitability, but also that they're doing right by their apprentices and retaining those apprentices because of how well they're being treated. Lastly, apprenticeships provide credentials. Apprentices who complete their program receive a nationally recognized Journey Worker Certificate from the U.S. Department of Labor. However, that's generally not the only credential that apprentices will receive as a part of their program. Additional credentials like licenses, degrees, certificates are often built into as part of program development, and we'll see that later on. That's for multiple reasons. One, some occupations just require more training. Something like an industrial maintenance technician, for example, or a registered nurse, they're going to require probably 2 years of post-secondary training at a higher education institution. Not everything's going to require that, but as a part of attaining that credentialing, they will oftentimes gain additional credentials. And that's not a bad thing because better credentials equal a better value add for apprentices, which means it's going to be easier to recruit them, and it's going to be easier for the employer to keep them after they've finished their training. Now, I will say that many employers will, outside of their apprenticeship agreement, will have agreements or contracts in place with their apprentices that say, hey, we're paying for your associate's degree, we're paying for your CDL, you're going to stick with us at least 2-3 years, or you're paying us back some prorated amount of the money that we spent on you as an employee. And that's totally fine. That's something that's to be expected when employers are making that kind of investment. However, the carrot is oftentimes easier than the stick. And so if we build these programs correctly, they don't have to weaponize that kind of agreement. So now that we've talked about apprenticeship basics, we're going to move on to discussing the roles in the Illinois registered apprenticeship ecosystem. This first one is important. It's the program sponsor. Now, that word sponsor confuses people to no end because when we hear sponsor, we think that's who's paying for it, but that's not the case. A program sponsor for an apprenticeship is just the entity that is legally responsible for the apprenticeship program and maintains its documentation. So oftentimes employers are the sponsors for themselves, but LWIAs can be, local workforce areas can also be sponsors. Community colleges frequently are sponsors. CBOs can be sponsors, or another employer sometime will have a program that's open for other employers to participate in. Because again, it's not about who's paying for it. It's not even about who's employing the apprentices. The primary responsibility of an apprenticeship sponsor is to ensure that their information is kept up to date in the Registered Apprenticeship Partners Information Database System. And that means helping ensure that they're enrolled correctly and ensuring that when they complete their program, it's marked in the system so that DOL can send them that Journey Worker Certificate. So that is, generally speaking, what the responsibility of the program sponsor is. They're also required to complete that affirmative action plan process if the program has more than 5 apprentices, but anybody can be a program sponsor, and it doesn't really make a difference to DOL so long as somebody, again, is claiming legal responsibility for that program. Second important role in the WRAP ecosystem is intermediaries. An intermediary is an organization that provides services to apprentices and or apprenticeship employers. That might mean case management, like that provided by American Job Centers and LWEs. It might mean wraparound supportive services. It may mean offering a pre-apprenticeship skills training program to get somebody the education or ESL or whatever they may need to succeed in an apprenticeship. And it may mean providing classroom instruction. Community colleges are often high impact intermediaries, we call them, because not only do they provide classroom instruction, but they may also do case management. They may help wraparound support services. They may also function as the sponsor. And community colleges are one of the most important partners we have in apprenticeship expansion in the state of Illinois because they are often so well equipped to be these high impact intermediaries. And a high impact intermediary can make the difference between a program that flourishes and a program that doesn't even make it off the ground. When you have a partner organization that's willing to invest time in ensuring the success of the apprentices and the employer, it's a huge benefit. And so intermediaries are some of our most treasured partners in apprenticeship expansion in Illinois. Apprenticeship training representatives. So Illinois is what's called a DOL Office of Apprenticeship state. That means apprenticeships in the state of Illinois are registered directly to the Federal Department of Labor through a local office. So Illinois itself does not register apprenticeships. We work with the federal DOL to do that. And so programs are registered and monitored through US DOL, and their ATRs are their frontline staff here in the state of Illinois. And so ATRs help programs sponsor or develop or revise a program for registration. They keep sponsors aware of any relevant policy changes, and they help sponsors with the affirmative action planning process. If it sounds like there's some overlap between the ATRs and what our Apprenticeship Illinois specialists do, that's correct. But because we have the localized specialists who cover much less territory than the ATRs do, they're able to give employers a little bit more attention, a little more time for hands-on assistance than ATRs necessarily always have the capacity to do. So ATR is an important partner for helping us get these programs registered because they have the final say and stamp of approval on those programs for federal DOL. And of course, our regional specialists we've already covered. They're funded by the Apprenticeship Illinois Grant Program through awards provided to local workforce area grantees. They provide an end-to-end concierge service to employers looking to develop or join a registered apprenticeship program. And their primary function is to work with ATRs to register programs on behalf of interested employers. So they're doing outreach in the field, and then once they've gotten those leads of employers who are looking to develop, they take them all the way through the registration process so that the employer at no stage has to kind of figure this stuff out on their own. They've always got a buddy. Their buddy is their regional specialist, and their buddy is their ATR, right? So we covered that. And then the integrated business service team is a huge component of why Apprenticeship Illinois has been successful in terms of its expansion efforts, because it's comprised of many of you, our WEO, title partners, local economic development organizations, CBOs, K-12 educators, post-secondary education institutions, municipalities, state agency partners, and LWIB staff. Everybody in the ecosystem for your local area, local workforce area, is now a part of the apprenticeship team. If you didn't know you were a part of apprenticeship expansion in Illinois, congratulations. Now you are. And you are pivotal, in fact, because you help us provide referral of services for employers and apprentices looking to get involved in registered apprenticeship. So everybody has a role to play. Frontline staff can recruit and refer apprentices. Business service staff can recruit and refer businesses. And we all help each other that way. So whether it's referring someone through a virtual job fair services into an apprenticeship, whether it's using the time we have with another employer to refer them to an apprenticeship specialist or local workforce area who can help provide them that service, everybody can help connect those dots so that we're breaking down those silos, which everybody in workforce development loves to hear, right? We're breaking down the silos. An integrated business service team is a huge portion of that. So now we'll move on to the stage where we will discuss registered apprenticeship outreach and development. And here's where we will get into the 3 C's. But first, we want to talk about what are our goals when we conduct outreach to an employer. Apprenticeships can seem abstract. Some of you are sitting through this presentation, you've heard those 7 DOL components, and I'm willing to wager that the concept of apprenticeship still feels kind of abstract to you. And that's okay. Our goal when we do outreach is to make it tangible. People hear registered apprenticeship, they hear DOL, they get scared. They think, oh, that's going to be a lot of red tape, it's going to be a lot of bureaucracy. And so our goal is to dissuade them of that notion by creating a process that is immensely concise. We want to take employers from a consideration mindset to a design mindset. And I'll note that our next session is going to be specifically on employer outreach and kind of tackling the issue more from a sales perspective. So I'm not going to go too far into that today. But needless to say, our primary goal is taking someone from, do I want an apprenticeship, to having them imagine and conceive of what their apprenticeship is actually going to look like. And the analogy I would give you here is, when you go to the car lot, you're generally not deciding if you're going to buy a car, and the auto salesman is not communicating with you to convince you to buy a car in general. They want you to buy one of their cars from them. And so when we meet with employers, we're not just saying, we'd like you to have an apprenticeship. We want them to start thinking about what kind of apprenticeship they are going to have. So moving from consideration into design in a concise manner, and we'll show you how we do that. Employers who aren't engaged with apprenticeship or work-based learning may also not be engaged with workforce development resources in general. Anybody in the WIOA ecosystem, I'm sure, can note that oftentimes it's one of the best kept secrets, right? And so by helping employers pursue apprenticeship, we're helping them move from isolation to a state of interconnectivity, whereby pursuing apprenticeship, not only are they going to have an apprenticeship, but we're going to connect them to WIOA business services. We're going to help connect their employees to WIOA services for individuals. And so we want to take employers from a state of interest to a state of investment. And so when we register a program, we're going to try and simplify the process as much as possible by fitting all the information we need to register a program into 3 easy categories that we call the 3 C's of registered apprenticeship. Now, the first C is competencies. What skills should the apprentice have by the time they have completed their apprenticeship? Simply put, what do we want the apprentice to be able to do when they are done? The second C is coursework. We talked about that supplemental instruction. What training will the apprentice receive to support their skills growth? And lastly, compensation. How much is the apprentice going to be paid, and how are they going to earn their wage increases? How many increments are there going to be? What is the threshold of competencies they have to meet to earn those increases? And so with those 3 pieces of information, we have about 80% of what we need to register a program. And here's the nice thing, is that of that 80%, 60% can be done before we even meet with the employer, which means we can, just by knowing some basic facts about the employer, just by knowing some basic knowledge of what sorts of roles they're looking to offer as part of their apprenticeship, we can brainstorm and prepare options for the competency list and for the coursework, so that when we sit down with them, we can show them and walk them through what their program looks like in real time, so that it's not some abstract thing, it's not some concept of 7 components, but we can say, here's what your apprentices are going to learn how to do, here's the coursework they're going to take, here's what it's going to cost, here's the funding we can offer you. And that's much easier to get a yes from there than it is to get a yes from, and it's, they're going to earn and they're going to learn. So again, it's taking it and making it tangible. And so here's what they love to hear. 80% of the paperwork can be completed and ready to present prior to meeting with an employer. We are simplifying this process. We are taking it from bureaucratic to concise. And the compensation component, we're not going to prepare because, again, obviously employers are going to decide what they're going to pay, but we can research the local market wages and we can help them develop that wage schedule once they're into the process. So employer outreach preparation. Once an employer has been referred to your integrated business service team, we want to take the following steps. First, we want to know where they are. We want to make sure that they're located in your area, that you are responsible for their services. Not that you wouldn't help them regardless, but we want to make sure that everything else we do is going to kind of have a waterfall effect if we don't make sure that they're actually in our area. and we're going to ask them what positions they're looking to develop an apprenticeship for. Employers may tell you this right off the bat. They may say, hey, we want to do a program for, CNC operators. And you say, okay, great. And now you know. Or they may not be upfront about that. But we're not only going to pursue apprenticeships for the initial occupations they tell us. And if they don't pursue our occupations, that doesn't mean we don't have anything to go on. Because we can research their organization by reading their website, looking at reviews on Glassdoor, LinkedIn, try to get a feel for the company culture. And importantly, we want to look at what job postings they're currently offering online. Because if they tell me they want CNC operator only, but I look and they're posting industrial maintenance technician on every single job posting website and they're on Help Wanted online, I'm going to prepare something for industrial maintenance technician so I can show them, oh, and hey, I know in case you need this, we also have a program option for that. And one of the great instances in which this is important is something like IT. So if I was meeting with a hospital, for example, it might not be my first impulse to bring something for, a network engineer or IT support specialist. But if I looked on the Help Wanted online, or if I looked on the employer website, hospitals have a huge need for IT. And so we don't always want to go on our first assumptions of what an employer needs. We want to let them tell us, but also we want to use the resources we have to try and figure it out beforehand. And so the Help Wanted Online report from IDES is a hugely valuable resource for doing this research and just finding out what the state of employer needs in your area are in general. So this is an older screenshot, a year old now. Wow. But we can see for EDR 7, it shows us who the top employers are in terms of job postings online. And it shows us the top occupations that have been posted for that month to the online job boards. And so not all of those occupations are necessarily going to be apprenticeable, but if we even just look down the list here, we see things like registered nurses, industrial engineers, heavy and tractor trailer truck drivers, post-secondary teachers, all of these occupations which are apprenticeable that we could develop programs for. And so if we know that there is a need for that occupation in our area, and we know that the employer we're meeting with has that occupation, it's good to prepare that ahead of time, right? So once we have occupations either provided for us beforehand by the employer or through research, we're going to find that first C, that competency, by identifying a template for that program that we call a work process schedule. You think, oh no, here comes the jargon. Just think of it, it's a list of competencies. I mentioned that apprentices are in every occupation and every sector. And that's true. And over 1,300 occupations are already registered with DOL. That's great news for you because it means A, you don't have to register a new occupation with the Department of Labor, which isn't too lengthy of a process, but can be a bit of a roadblock at times. It means most of the work has already been done for you and by extension already done for the employer. So for all of those 1,300 occupations, there is a paperwork template for the entirety of what a program can look like. And so then we're not just having to build something from scratch, but we have a template that we can revise with an employer, reducing the number of steps, reducing the number of necessary meetings, getting that program across the finish line faster, more expediently, and more conveniently for the employer. And so I'll show you what those templates look like, but once we have done those revisions, once we have ensured that the competency list for the occupation looks like what the employer wants to look like, we've got one of our 3 Cs. And so if we go on apprenticeship.gov, we're going to navigate to the Occupation Finder app on there. And so you can do that from the home page. You see up at the top, you can actually navigate there from the resources or educators or employers tab. So almost no matter what you click on the website, if you find Occupation Finder, you can get to this page. And here's where we can search by occupation. You can search either by keywords. So I could type in registered nurse or automotive technician or whatever I'm looking for, or I can put in the ONET code for that occupation, which we've already looked up that ONET code because we've been looking at competitive salaries for our areas, right? It all links together. So it's really easy to locate. And so we can see here in this example, I looked up automotive technician specialist. And so we can see it's going to show me on that right-hand main column different variations of templates I can utilize. So the one that's open is automotive mechanic, but there's also more specific competency lists for auto radiator mechanic and spring repairer hand that are there. And then on the left, we see the metadata. Those are all the alternate titles for that position. And so if the employer I was looking with wanted a lube tech or a quick service technician or any of those, it would also come up under this ONET number. And so then we're able to download what that template list looks like. And here's a kind of a minimized, shortened version of what one of these work process schedule looks like. We see the occupation title and the job description. We see the estimated program length for the apprenticeship, and then we have a list of competencies with headings and specific competencies. And so we can revise these as needed to fit the employer specifications. So for example, I developed an automotive mechanic program with an employer, and they looked through the verbiage on this and they said, we don't do carburetors anymore. That's kind of old. Just put fuel injection systems. And so we took out the word carburetor, put in fuel injection system, bada bing, bada boom. That is a customized apprenticeship program for that employer. Now, there may be times when revisions are more significant than that. Employers may ask you to add competencies. They may change wordings. They may remove whole competencies. The general rule of thumb for this is going to be kind of a squint test. If you can squint at the occupation and it still looks like the occupation that the title is, you're good to go. If you've gotten to the point where your automotive mechanic is doing things that automotive mechanics don't do, and they've added half of them are sales competencies, half of them are management competencies, then we're getting into sort of an iffy area. But for the most part, we're able to customize these competencies in such a way to reflect the role at the employer's place of business without compromising their quality and standardization. So once we have revised those competencies with the employers, we have our first C, and we can move on to the second C, which is curriculum. What is the training the employer is going to provide to the apprentices? And because we've already collected their location information for them, we can see which Illinois Community College Board district that the employer falls in, and we can partner with that college, or if they're unable to participate with us, we can also look at what their curricular offerings are ourselves, or look at what other training providers exist in our area. And so if I identify the community college provider for my area and I know I'm doing an automotive technician program, I can see what does my local community college have in the way of certificate or degree programs for that occupation. Most of the time, for many occupations, your college will have at the very least coursework that can support the occupation, and they may have fully built out programs. And if you're working closely with them, they may even be able to develop customized training options, right? And it's all going to be based on the need of the employer and the need of the occupation. And so what we can do then is if there are relevant programs, we can download and print out the course descriptions, the estimated total cost per student. A lot of community colleges nowadays very conveniently will kind of have a one-pager that says what the total cost of a program is, and they'll even break it down and itemize it. And that's gold for an employer, because what we can do then is print those out for the community college, for a third-party training provider. If there's a trade school, we can print that out. And so then we can present to them a menu of options. So now we have presented for them a template of a 80% already pretty much good out of the box in many cases list of competencies, and all of the options they have for classroom training that will successfully supplement that on-the-job training for their program. And again, it can't be stressed enough how important it is that we have a lot of high impact, super incredible community college partners, because a lot of them are able to do things like find scheduling options that work better for apprentices. They're able to build in online coursework that's asynchronous or synchronous, or night classes. Some community college programs have moved to 1 day a week or 2 day a week scheduling so that the employer doesn't have to lose that much productivity during the time that the apprentice is in training. And so the closer relationship we're able to establish with our local training providers, not just community colleges, but also K-12, also third-party training organizations and specific industry training organizations, the better we're able to serve employers. And so having those training providers represented and enthusiastically participating in our integrated business service teams is one of the ways we can ensure the strength of our collaboration. And if there's not relevant curricular offerings available in your area for some occupations, for example, I know an occupation that's kind of been a pain point for a lot of healthcare employers is something like respiratory therapists, where we have areas of the state that don't necessarily offer respiratory therapist coursework. We're going to begin looking at industry online training providers, and we're going to collect the same cost, time, coursework information on those programs as we would for a local community college program. Again, we want to empower the employer to make an informed decision on the curriculum they select. And this is also an instance in which we're doing some of that quality control, helping to build in high quality apprenticeship outcomes, because by presenting the employers with certificate or degree or fully credentialed education programs out of the box, we're encouraging them not to do that bare minimum 144 hours, not just picking and choosing a handful of random classes and throwing them at the wall and see if they stick, but developing the program in tangent with the educational program that's offered, so that they're supplementing each other in a meaningful way and not just checking a box. So once we have researched the competencies and we have looked at the coursework, we're then going to move along to presenting the full package. And so we're going to present the 7 components of apprenticeship to make sure the employer knows what's going on. We're going to present applicable WIOA services. We mentioned before, incumbent worker training is a huge opportunity that could be utilized to upskill existing workers through those funds. We're going to communicate about the DCO tax credit that's sunsetting at the end of this year, but additional incentives TBD. CJA incentives is a huge thing that's coming down the pipeline. If there's the ability to weave together those funding streams, we want to help them visualize from start to finish what their program will look like. Your apprentice is going to know these things, take these classes, it's going to cost this much, we're going to help you with this amount of funding. And then the action item for them is to revise that competency list, finalize the coursework, and finalize that progressive wage schedule. Now, I'll tell you that in the development process, the wage schedule can sometimes be the biggest sticking point. I've met with employers where competencies, they say, looks great, or they get revisions back to me right away. Coursework, they say, that looks great, and they finalize that pretty quickly. And then the wage schedule takes 3 months. And so what I tell our specialists frequently is just ask the employer, what number do you want the program to start at? What's the starting wage? What is going to be the ending wage? And give them some options. So I showed like the basic and the more extensive. Just ask them, how many rungs do you want there to be on that ladder, and kind of develop it for them. And ultimately, they can say yes or no. They can say, no, our payroll department's going to have a fit if I do that. Or they may say that looks great. And so again, doing as much of the work for the employer as we can, while still empowering them to make the important decisions regarding what their program ends up looking like in execution. And so we will need some additional pieces of information to register a program with the Department of Labor. We'll need to know the size of the company. We'll need to know their address. We'll need to know who their complaint contact is going to be in the unfortunate and unlikely event they receive complaints of some kind. Most often, this is going to be whoever the principal point of contact has been for the business, so no big hurdle there. We'll need to know the hiring procedures. Again, I noted earlier that one of the ways we ensure equitable treatments for apprenticeships in these programs is that employers have to have a standardized version of the hiring procedures for all apprentices. So you can't have one apprentice just has one conversation and they get a handshake and they're on board, and then the other apprentice you have doing backflips through 3 different follow-up calls. I want to make sure that all applicants are being treated equitably. We want to have the minimum hiring requirements for the program. So if they want a high school diploma, GED, if they're requiring someone to have a driver's license, if there's a minimum weight they need to be able to lift, for example, those are all things that have to be set on paper. That's pretty standard. Most employers will have like a boilerplate version of that available already. Are they interested in opening the program to other employers? Is a piece of information we need to know. And is there going to be pay for classroom time? Now, this I'd like to go into a little bit. Employers are not required to pay for the hours that their apprentices spend in the classroom. However, they do have to tell DOL whether or not they're going to up front. And again, this is an instance where the final decision is the employers to make. Certainly, most employers will not pay apprentices the same hourly rate for time they spend in a classroom as compared to hours they spend on the job. However, I'll put a hypothetical to you. If we have somebody who is taking 15 credit hours of college level coursework at the same time as they are working 40 plus hours on the job as an as an apprentice, and they're not getting compensated for that classroom time, that is a recipe for burnout. And that's something we shouldn't be afraid to say to employers. Or another situation I can present to you. Let's say that is an occupation like CNA or CDL, where you're looking at 4 to 6 to 10 weeks of training before they can even hit the job. If that time's not being compensated, you are asking someone to go without pay for 4 to 6 to 8, however many weeks, just to begin the program. That's a huge barrier for somebody. And so we want to, again, let employers know about these things. And so in terms of how employers compensate for classroom time, employers do it differently based on the occupation, based on their practices. So some employers will provide a cash or travel stipend for apprentices who need travel compensated because in some areas, especially it could be a half hour, 45-hour drive to the training provider. They may provide minimum wage for the hours they spend in the classroom, or they may work with an additional organization to provide stipends. There are lots of different forms of compensation for classroom time can take. All DOL needs to know is, in general, are they being paid for the hours they spend in the classroom? Because again, it's important for the apprentice to be able to know what they're getting into up front. Transparency is a huge part of why these programs are successful. And so if any of this has been overwhelming or felt like too much for you, or you have questions, as I'm sure many of you do, we're here to help. I offer office hours Mondays and Wednesdays from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m., and those are open to all Illinois employers, apprenticeship stakeholders, and organizations in need of apprenticeship assistance. We do one-on-one trainings, group presentations, consultations with employers, program development. If you want me to walk you through, I'm more than happy to, and I have before. Okay, you said we find the competencies on the website. How do I get there exactly? I'm happy to do that with you. You say, okay, you said to find a curriculum. How do I find the ICCB map? How do I know what curriculums are going to match up to this occupation? We can walk through going through the ETPL together. We can brainstorm strategy sessions. We are a resource here for you to help expand apprenticeship in the state of Illinois. And so I have the Zoom link on there at the bottom, and we'll be sure to get that sent out to you as an actual link for you to have with the recording of this. But just know that you can drop in. You can drop in with an employer. I'd prefer a heads up if you're bringing an employer, but I'm a resource here for you. And I have additional availability by appointment. So don't feel that you can't bring us concerns outside of that window. Know that we're here to help. Additionally, for regions that do not have a regional specialist, don't have an Apprenticeship Illinois grant, I work with the employers for that region. So if your region doesn't have a specialist, but you're looking to do apprenticeship outreach or development, feel free to connect with me. I'm happy to work with the employers in your area or help to train up some of your business service team staff so they feel better equipped. Obviously, this webinar series, I think, is going to be a huge boost to everybody feeling more equipped to dealing with apprenticeship and helping register these programs, but just know that there is additional assistance available as well. All right, I know we've gone fast today, but we have plenty of time for Q&A, and so I'm going to go back for the chat if there's anything I missed, and if not, we'll be able to give you all some time back. Feel free to drop questions in the chat. Feel free to unmute. Like I said, we've got plenty of time here, so.
Nate, this is Bonnie with Region EDR 9. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Bonnie. How's it going?
Okay. So I've approached like three different employers about apprenticeships, and I love this information about getting everything together and presenting a packet of information. I did not do that. But I was just telling them in general about apprenticeships. And their big hang up is the classroom training. I've had two of them say we don't do any classroom training, and we're not going to. And then one is on the fence about it. So how do I entice, I guess, employers to want to do the classroom training, or is that not worth wasting time on, or just move on to the other employers?
So here's what I'll say is a lot of the time, the classroom training is a necessity in terms of getting people up to speed in the high skilled occupations that employers need. Now, employers may feel differently about this. They may say, hey, if you just give us someone who's willing to work, we'll get them up to speed, we'll give them the training they need. And if they want to muscle through that on their own, that is their prerogative. There are still instances in which there is probably online training providers industry specific who can provide education. If it's the classroom specific, someone sitting in a classroom that their biggest hangup is, again, I would encourage you to pursue online training options with them. But the classroom training is required on these programs because it works, because it helps empower and enable those apprentices to be more productive, to be more knowledgeable in the occupations that they're going into compared to somebody who didn't get that training. Cost can be a barrier for a number of reasons, but that's why we're able to leverage WIOA funds and present those things side by side, and never just in a vacuum of, and you're going to pay for this and you're going to pay for this. Presented as, and here's opportunities we have to help make this more affordable for you. But also, I would say employers who are desperately in need of the talent that apprenticeship can help them train and replenish, they're losing a lot of money based on lost productivity. For every machine they don't have manned, for every day they have somebody out they don't have a substitute to sub in for, that is money that their organization is hemorrhaging in terms of profitability and productivity. And so we have the numbers. The ROI for apprenticeship is about $1.50 on the dollar. So it's never the case that they're simply going to be spending money on classroom training frivolously, because you're going to work with them to ensure that the training is necessary and is beneficial for their program.
Thank you. That's wonderful information.
Thank you, Bonnie. Are there any other questions?
So Nate, a lot of people say that apprenticeships are just too hard. It's not worth the work. What would you say to employers or people that say that?
Sure. So the thing about apprenticeship programs is if you're working with good partners, and especially if you're working with our apprenticeship specialists, they pretty much run themselves once you set them up. The actual administrative work for apprenticeship, once apprentices have been enrolled, is relatively minor, and oftentimes aligns with the best practices that many employers are already doing. A lot of hospitals are already paying to upskill CNAs into LPNs. A lot of employers already provide some form of reimbursement for employees going back to school, or they have some form of onboarding that pairs employees up with a mentor figure. And so really what apprenticeship allows us to do is capitalize on the best practices they're already implementing. And it doesn't often, most of the time, it's not going to be some radical shift in their hiring practices or their onboarding practices, but expanding upon the good things they're already doing. And our specialists have been trained to ensure that the process of registration is streamlined, is easy, is painless. I always say, I have the migraine, so you don't have to. And everybody involved in the Apprenticeship Illinois ecosystem is dedicated to making the process as streamlined and easy for employers as possible. And through our integrated business service team approach, not only is it easy, but because we're also connecting them to resources, to funding streams, it can be downright profitable to engage in these processes, in addition to being quite simple.
What about employers where it's kind of scary to get started? Like,
Sure.
they don't want to bring on new, like, people they don't even know and start this program. What would you say?
Yeah, and that's where I recognize that sometimes the idea of doing new hires and investing a lot into new hires can be scary up front for employers, right? They want to safeguard the investment they're making. And that's where doing incumbent worker training, upskilling their current workforce, can be a huge boost. Most organizations have entry-level folks who don't want to be entry level, who want to be earning more, learning more, doing more. A lot of employers have employees they see who are dedicated at that entry level, but don't have the credentials they need to move up. And so investing in those employees who already have a proven track record of accountability or soft skills is one way to ensure to safeguard that investment. But also working closely with educational partners like K-12 to refer individuals who want to be in those occupations. If we can develop a youth apprenticeship, something we didn't go into detail on today, for an occupation, if we know that we've got 18, 19-year-olds who passionately want to pursue automotive technician, if I run an auto shop, what do I want to do? I want to capture that talent before it goes somewhere else. An apprenticeship allows us to do that, to find the people who are passionate for a specific occupation and invest in them as a community, as employers, as workforce areas. So incumbent worker training and partnering with organizations who can refer good qualified candidates, I think is helpful in terms of dissuading that fear. But also, as I noted, employers are totally free to have agreements in place with their apprentices when they start, so that if they're paying for training and that person drops out, they're not on the hook. They're able to say, okay, we spent this money on you and you didn't come through. We're going to bill you for what you didn't come through for us. So that is an option that employers are welcome to do, and many do, to safeguard that investment. And so knowing that they have multiple options for talent streams and multiple options to safeguard the money they're putting into their programs hopefully helps employers feel a little bit less of that apprehension.
Hello, my name is Tabitha Jacobs. I'm with National Tube Supply. If we have in-house already developed training that is site-specific or business-specific, can we use that as a part of the RTI requirement?
Absolutely. Now, the rule for this is going to be, again, and you said site specific, and that's great. What we don't want is, some employers have like a general learning platform where people can take random courses on continuing education type stuff. That's something we wouldn't want built in, but specific internally developed training is okay. However, you will need to kind of itemize it for DOL. So they'll want to know, in terms of the RTI, how many hours are they spending on each module or each topic? And they might want to know what are the specific skill gains that they're getting from each of those modules or trainings, et cetera. And it would still need to add up to that 144 contact hours. But high quality internal trainings absolutely get utilized for RTI, oftentimes in combination with other provided trainings. Great question.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? If you think of something after the fact, please feel free to shoot me an email. Again, I am here as a resource for all of our apprenticeship partners and stakeholders statewide. There are no dumb questions. We are so happy to be able to work with all of you to strengthen our apprenticeship ecosystem, to create these high quality opportunities for individuals and employers in Illinois. And so we appreciate your collaboration, whether you are a local workforce area, Title I, whether you're a will-be or currently intermediary. The work you do is important, and we appreciate you and your time.
Yep. And as a reminder, this is recorded, so I will be sending the link out to everyone once it's posted and online. And so thank you again for your participation. I did put our contact info in the chat if you want to grab that. Otherwise, you can also respond to the email once it goes out if you need any additional follow-up, or just reach out to Nate, kind of the subject expert on this. And everyone have a great day. Thank you so much for joining.